Hi, my name is Myranda Kuhn, and I'm going to be presenting a lesson on understanding the quadratic standard form of the quadratic equation. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to be using this whiteboard here to simulate the whiteboard in the classroom, as well as an electronic tablet to simulate the projector that I will be incorporating the use of technology in. Okay. Hi, my name is Mrs. Kuhn, and I'm going to be presenting the quadratic equation to everyone. So if everyone could go ahead and get out their math notebooks, we're going to take some notes so we can learn as well as study what different aspects of the quadratic equation is. So the first thing that we need to put in our notebook is what the quadratic equation is. And that's going to say ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It's always going to be in this standard form. So we're taking our highest number, ax squared, or we could say our highest variable, and it is going in descending order, which means it's going lower. So high to low to low. Okay, so that's how we're going to put in our notebook. We're going to have the quadratic equation, and we're going to have this equation here. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is a little bit of vocab that is associated with the quadratic equation. So the first word that we're going to put down is quadratic. So does anybody know what quadratic means? What can we assume about this word? We see this word, what does it mean? Sure, quadratic could mean 4, because of the word quad. Sure, but a little bit more in depth. What makes this? What stands out in this equation that makes it quadratic? Exactly. There's something here, this x term to the power. So the word quadratic for our math notebooks will say something like this. It will say x squared is equal to quadratic. So that's something that we have to remember when we are using the quadratic equation, that quadratic actually means x squared. And that's how you can determine whether or not an equation is quadratic. So you might come across a quadratic equation, and that's something later on in different lessons. So the next thing that we need to write down in our math notebooks is what each of these terms mean. So we need to write down, what does ax squared mean? So based on what we just talked about, the first thing that we can determine based on this, what does ax squared mean? Exactly, ax squared means that it's a quadratic term. So you can put quadratic. It's our quadratic term. Yep, and how do we know that? Absolutely, we know because of what we just said. Quadratic is x squared. It means it's quadratic. So we see that this x squared here makes this first term quadratic. What about bx? Can anybody say what bx is? That's okay if we don't know. No issue, we'll move forward. Bx here is going to be our linear term. Okay? Now, we won't go completely in depth with this because at this point in the lesson, we're just learning what quadratic equation in the standard form is. So we're just going to figure out what equations are quadratic and what equations can we put into standard form. Okay, so that's this bx. That's going to be our linear term. What about the term c? This one here is a little tricky. This one's just going to be our constant term. So we need to make sure that we have these in our these notes in our math notebook, and this is going to tell us what these terms mean, what quadratic means, what each of these determine in our quadratic equation when we go to future lessons, when we go to, graphing this quadratic equation. But just for the purpose of today's lesson, we're not going to go into graphing the equation, but we are going to go just a little bit further into rearranging an equation to make it quadratic. All right, so at this point we already know that the quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c, and it's always going to be equal to 0. Okay, so at this point, let's go ahead and put our math notebook off to the side, and I'm going to show you a little video that's going to show us identifying equations and rearranging them into those terms that allows us to make them quadratic. Okay, so everyone go ahead and eyes up front, and this is going to be our video here. Hopefully you guys can see this.
Rewrite the equation 6x squared plus 3 is equal to 2x minus 6 in standard form and identify a, b, and c. So standard form for quadratic.
Okay. All right, a little technical difficulty, but here we go. Let's restart the video here.
3 is equal to 2x minus 6 in standard form and identify a, b, and c. So standard form for a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So essentially we want to get all of the terms on the left-hand side, and then we want to write them so that we have the x terms in where their exponents are in decreasing order. So we have the x squared term, then the x term, and then we have the constant term. So let's try to do this over here. So let me rewrite our original equation. We have 6x squared plus 3 is equal to 2x minus 6. So essentially you want to get everything on the left-hand side. So I could subtract 2x from both sides. So I could subtract 2x from both sides. So I'll take one step at a time. So I can subtract 2x from both sides. And then I'm going to write it in descending order for the exponents on x. So the highest exponent is x squared, so I'll write that first. 6x squared, and then we have minus 2x, and then we have plus 3 is equal to, the 2x's on the right cancel out, equal to negative 6. And now to get rid of this negative 6 on the right-hand side, we can add 6 to both sides. So let's add 6 to both sides. And then this simplifies to 6x squared minus 2x plus 9 is equal to 0. So let's make sure we're already in standard form. All of our terms, our non-zero terms, are on the left-hand side. We've done that. We have a 0 on the right-hand side. We've done that. And we have the x squared term first, then the x to the first power term, then the constant term. X squared, then x to the first, then the constant term. So we are in standard form. And so we can say that a is equal to 6. A is equal to 6. We could say that b is equal to, and this is key, it's not just the 2, it's the negative 2. B is equal to negative 2, because notice it says plus bx, but over here we have minus 2x. So the b is a negative 2 here. B is negative 2, and then C is going to be 9.
All right, class. So based on that video here, we saw him put an equation into the standard form of our ax squared plus bx plus c. So let's take a couple examples here. So before we start, he did make an interesting note. So we know that our quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c, and it's all equal to 0. But if you notice, his b term was actually a negative term, even though we have this plus sign here. This is something you should write in your notes. The terms don't always have to be positive. Although this is the standard form here, our a term, b term, and c term might not always be positive. Like in his example, he had a negative term for his b term, and that's okay. That's still the correct way to evaluate this equation. So as long as you have the terms in descending order here, you have the x squared, the bx, and the c, and they're not back and forth, and you have your terms properly, and you've conducted the proper steps in this equation, you should be fine when you come to labeling your a, b, and c term. Okay, so let's take this example here. We have 7x plus 2 equals minus 6x squared. So the first thing that we see, what is the first thing that we notice? Right, absolutely. This term, these terms here, these variables, are not in proper order. So when we look at this, what's the first thing that we need to do? Anybody? Anybody can answer. The first thing that we should do. Yep, I like the way you think. We have to get this equation in standard form. So what's our first step then? If we have to get this in standard form, what's the first thing that we need to do? Yep, we have to say, since this is a negative, we have to say adding 6x squared to both sides. So what does this mean? Does this cancel out? Absolutely. In our video, we saw that he had a term that canceled out. That was his 2x. So that canceled out for him. So how would we rewrite this? Where would we put this 6x squared if we're referring back to here? Absolutely, the first term, so 6x squared, our first term. And our second term, 7x. Our second term, and that's always going to be equal to 0. Since we canceled this side out, this side is now equal to 0. Are we done? Absolutely. This equation is now in standard form, and you can now label your A's, B, and C. So what is our A? Yep, 6. Our B is 7, and our C is 2. So now we have labeled these here. Let's go on to another equation, something a little bit harder. All right. Let's say we have 5x squared, that's going to be the first part, minus 12x plus 10 equals 5 minus 4x. Oh, I forgot the x here. Okay. So, the first thing we should ask ourselves, what do we think the first thing we should ask ourselves? Is this in standard form? Absolutely. So is it? Nope, it's not. So what do we think is the first thing that we can do in this equation? What's the first thing that you think that we should do? The first thing I think is we should isolate this side of the equation. Get all these variables and move it over here. Get them out of the way so we can have this side equal to 0. Because what's our equation? Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and do this. So we have, let's start with the right side. We have a negative 4x. What's the first thing we should do? All right, yeah, let's do it. Let's add 4x to both sides. So now that means that these cancel out. We have 5x squared minus 12x plus 10 plus 4x equals 5. Now, can we simplify? Can we put together some variables to simplify the left-hand side before we move on? Absolutely, yeah, sure. We could take this negative 12x and we could add 4x to this. So you could take this variable and this variable and you can add it together. So what does that mean? So that means that you're taking negative 12x plus 4x. And what does that give me, class? Yep, okay, that's good. All right. So we have a negative 8x. Okay. Plus 10, because we don't want to forget this term. And now we're at equals 5. Now we're here. So what's the next thing that we need to do in this equation? Are we done? We need to ask ourselves, okay, we did one step. Are we done? Nope, we're not done. That's right. I love it. What do we need to do? We need to isolate this side and make it equal 0. So how do we do that? We have a positive 5 here. We need to subtract 5 from both sides. Love it, love it. All right, so we have 5x squared minus 8x. So a positive 10 minus 5 gives us a positive 5. These cancel out. And what does that equal to if they cancel out? Yeah, you got it, guys. All right. So are we done? Are we done? Absolutely. Our equation now is in standard form. We have our 5x squared minus 8x plus 5 equals 0. So can we label our terms now? Can we label A? Can we label B? Can we label C? Absolutely. Here's our A term, our B term, and our C term. But remember, this B term is not positive, it's negative, so we need to make sure that B is equal to negative 8. Okay? All right, so we've done a couple examples here. For the remainder of the class period, I'm going to go ahead and pass out a worksheet. Does anyone have questions on this? Absolutely. There are some equations that might have more steps than just 1 or 2 steps. You might come across 4 or 5 variables that are on the right-hand side of an equation. Absolutely, you might. So I'm going to go ahead and pass out a worksheet, and I want you guys to go ahead and get into your peer groups. And your peer groups should be 3 or 4 of you guys in together, and you guys will be working together on the quadratic equation worksheets. And what I want you guys to do is kind of bounce back and forth, how we kind of bounce back and forth in class with each other. I'll ask a question, so what's our next step? And you guys should ask your peers, what's the next step? Are we finished here? Those are questions that we should be asking ourselves. Is there another step? Can we simplify our equation before moving on? How we had 2 x variables on one side and we combined them. We had the negative 12x and the positive 4x. We combined those. So those are things that we should be asking each other in our peer groups. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this out. And you guys go ahead. I will be walking around the room to help any individual or any group that might have questions on this. And then I'm going to give you guys a worksheet to take home to do individually with yourself and your notes. You can use your notes. And we'll go over that tomorrow. Okay? All right. Go ahead and get started. Can't wait to see you guys work together. Thank you.